So you want to know more about the scholarly study of the end of Mormon polygamy, namely the decades surrounding the 1890 Manifesto. My name is Benjamin Park. As a scholar of American history and Mormon studies, I've been intrigued over the last couple of weeks as the news has circled around the newly available John Taylor revelation, an 1886 revelation in which John Taylor prophesied that polygamy would never be done away, a document that has been crucial to Mormon fundamentalist truth claims over the past 100 years, but the LDS Church has long denied its validity until making it available. This has raised an interest in the general public about this general topic. What led to the LDS Church publicly renouncing the practice of polygamy, the long aftermath of the secretive practice, and then eventual forfeiture in the around 1904-5, then 1910, and the origins of Mormon fundamentalism. My Friday video series for this YouTube channel typically focuses on, so you want to know more about X topic, and I give you a broad litany of scholarly works so that you can do your research on it. I'm going to do an audible this week, and instead I'm going to talk about the background to one particularly significant historiographical contribution, and that's D. Michael Quinn's article, LDS Church Authority and New Plural Marriages, 1890 to 1904, which was the foundational work on this topic. And not only does it have important scholarship within the article, but it is a fascinating, riveting, revealing, sobering history behind the creation and publication of the article, as well as its aftermath. And then at the end of the video, I'll give some recommendations on a few other works you might want to consult if you want to study this fascinating topic. Let's dig in. There are few scholars more celebrated in their work of Mormon history than D. Michael Quinn, someone who I'll get to later was excommunicated in part due to his groundbreaking scholarship. One of his first scholarly focuses was on Mormon polygamy. You see, when he was an undergraduate student at Brigham Young University, one of his classmates, the future BYU religion professor Stephen Robinson, got upset when their religion professor denied that there had ever been any post-Manifesto polygamous sealings. Let's get these terms right from the start, by the way. When I refer to post-Manifesto polygamous sealings, I am referring to polygamous unions that were solemnized by LDS authorities after Wilford Woodruff issued the manifesto in 1890 that said the church would no longer do that. So now you got that terminology right. Stephen Robinson, again, later a BYU religion professor, his grandfather was a mission president in LDS Authority, and he had a post-Manifesto polygamous sealing solemnized by church leaders. And so Robinson, like many others who descended from these post-Manifesto polygamists, were upset that the church was denying the validity and truth of their stories. So D. Michael Quinn, then just having an interest in history, kind of put a footnote there, a bookmark to return to. Later on, after he served in the military, he went to graduate school at the University of Utah to get his master's degree in history, and he was hired by Leonard Arrington in Arrington's historical division. The 1970s was a time when, for the first moment, the LDS Church hired an actual historian, appointed someone with academic credentials to be their church historian, Leonard Arrington, a topic that I've covered in a previous video on the politics of Mormon history. Part of what came to be known as Arrington's Camelot was access to archival records that had long been sequestered and that scholars had not been able to consult before. So D. Michael Quinn, hired as a research assistant to Leonard Arrington and working on his master's thesis at the University of Utah, was interested in the evolution of LDS leadership circles. So he was studying how the Quorum of the 12, the First Presidency, the Quorums of the 70 came to be. And so he was frequently requesting access to sources that would allow him to get behind the scenes of these ecclesiastical offices and determine what those councils were actually doing. And so in 1974, he approached one of the individuals who was in charge of the church's archives, a guy by the name of Earl Olson, and asked, hey, I know that the First Presidency Vault, this long mythical collection of records that have not been made available to scholars, Quinn says, in that First Presidency Vault, I'm sure there are records that are crucial to my thesis. Could you at least let me know what's in there so I know what to ask for access to? And then Olson goes, all right, well, let me read through the catalog of what I have in the First Forensic Vault, and then you put together a formal request. So as Olson read through the contents of the archives, he noted, among other things, LDS temple ceilings from 1898 to 1903. And that pinged something in D. Michael Quinn's mind, because remember, he still had this interest in post-Manifesto ceilings. So he knew he wanted to ask for that document, but he didn't want to signify that he's only interested in the controversial. So he chose two other collections that were listed in the First Forensic Vault. So he had 3 total ones. The other 2 he called his filler, and then the marital record. When he got the marital record the next day, it was what he expected. These were the records of over 50 men who were sealed to plural wives by the apostle Matthias Cowley between 1898 and 1903. In other words, these were post-Manifesto polygamous sealings done by the authority of the LDS Church and done with the knowledge of several LDS leaders, including apostles. And by the way, there were several apostles among those in those records who were sealed to polygamous wives by Matthias Cowley. This was a home run for D. Michael Quinn, finally finding those records that confirmed what fundamentalists had long claimed and that the LDS Church had long denied, that the LDS Church solemnized plural marriages following the 1890 Manifesto. And if that wasn't enough, one of the other documents that he requested as filler, remember the documents he filled out just so he wouldn't gain too much suspicion from the authorities, was the Apostle George F. Richards' appointment book. That sounds boring enough. Well, in that record, it included the discussions over John W. Taylor's drop from the Quorum of the 12 and eventual excommunication over plural marriage, including his insistence that his father, John Taylor, had this 1886 revelation. You see how this is all tying together. So D. Michael Quinn, a fervent believer until his death, firmly believed that this was God leading him to these records to uncover this story. But not all church members, especially church leaders, would have seen this the same way. There were a number of leaders who were really uncomfortable with this study of Mormon fundamentalism, and there was a good reason why. During the 1970s and the 1980s, there was a growing number of LDS converts to fundamentalist communities who were coming to believe that the LDS Church had apostatized, lost its way, and that the fundamentalists had the truth, the fullness of the gospel, the top covenants and sealings like polygamy. And so LDS authorities were terrified that anything that would confirm those fundamentalist narratives, including post-Manifesto polygamy, would undercut the LDS Church claims. And so the way that they approached it during the late 1970s and early 1980s was to deny all elements of the fundamentalist origins claims, and that meant continuing to deny that the LDS Church solemnized plural marriages after the 1890 Manifesto. Quinn knew this dynamic, and so he actually wrote in his diary, "If I ever publish on this topic, nothing is going to keep the apostles from excommunicating me." A prediction that turned out to be quite prescient. It also became a key feature of D. Michael Quinn's growing conflict with the Quorum of the 12. So I'll give one example of this. In 1980 and 81, there was a tense fight between the apostle, Boyd K. Packer, who was often one of the most outspoken apostles skeptical of the academic study of Mormon history, and D. Michael Quinn. Boyd K. Packer, again an apostle, delivered an address at BYU titled "The Mantle is Far, Far Greater Than the Intellect," in which he argued that these scholars are undercutting LDS Church claims and they should not have a place under LDS employment, a direct threat to the type of works that D. Michael Quinn and others are doing, saying that these scholars need to get in line and follow what LDS apostles and prophets are saying and not challenging them. D. Michael Quinn then offers his own rebuttal at a public address at BYU in which he critiqued that type of perspective, saying that these scholars are necessary to show us the actual truth of the fast, and that it was those moral foundations that they learned within the moral tradition, within the Mormon tradition, that led them to uncover the real history. This dispute actually got covered in Newsweek magazine as apostles versus historians, and it got D. Michael Quinn in trouble. Quinn was actually called up to meet with Gordon B. Hinckley, who was then a counselor in the First Presidency, and wanted to know, why are you directly challenging church authorities? And Quinn countered, saying that, look, this is a necessary historical reckoning, and he used as his example the investigation into post-Manifesto polygamous sealings, making the case that if we really want to confront these conversions going over to the fundamentalists, we actually have to address history head on. Quinn made that same point to the then church historian G. Homer Durham, who replaces Leonard J. Arrington after the fall of Camelot. And Quinn convinces authorities that we actually need to have a truthful accounting, a reckoning with that past. And that enabled Quinn to get access to even more sources regarding fundamentalist origins and post-Manifesto polygamy, including, allegedly, John Taylor's own revelation, making Quinn perhaps one of the first historians to see the John Taylor revelation that has since been in the news. But by the time Quinn published his findings, I imagine a lot of the church leaders, those who at least gave him access to the sources, probably came to regret it due to the no polemic nature of these disputes between New Mormon history on the one side and LDS authorities on the other. Because in 1985, Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, one of the premier academic venues for Mormon studies, published the article that Quinn had been working on for over a decade, the origins of which go all the way back when Quinn was discussing post-Manifesto polygamy with his classmate Stephen Robinson at BYU. It was titled LDS Church Authority and New Plural Marriages, 1890 to 1904, and it was a historiographical watershed, meaning it overturned how most people viewed the end of polygamy. It was just shy of 100 pages long, and it featured 383 footnotes to give you a sense of how deep the research was. And it disproved the traditional church narrative of church authorities no longer practicing polygamy after the 1890 Manifesto. It had immediate consequences. Boyd K. Packer publicly denounced the article at a gathering of church members just weeks after its publication. And then he or other church authorities then instructed D. Michael Quinn, stake president, to revoke his temple recommend. Not only would that deprive Quinn, a true believing member who was a temple worker, from being able to attend the temple, but by no longer having a temple recommend, that meant Quinn could no longer be employed at BYU. So in other words, it was a way for Michael Quinn to lose his job. Fortunately for D. Michael Quinn, he had an understanding stake president who told him the whole backstory of what he was instructed to do. And the stake president came to a compromise. He said, well, I'm going to fulfill the letter of the instruction given to me, and I'm going to take your temple recommend, but instead of revoking it, I'm just going to put it in a drawer in my desk. And so if your leaders at BYU, your higher ups, ask you, do you have a temple recommend, which again is necessary for BYU employment, Quinn was to say, yes, I do. He just wasn't to volunteer the fact that it was sitting in his stake president's drawer. Now that granted D. Michael Quinn at least a little bit more time, but not too long. His privileges as an academic employee were increasingly curtailed. It was made clear that it was not going to get any easier. So eventually, within a couple of years, he resigned from BYU. And then a few years after that, he was excommunicated as part of the September 6th in 1993. Maybe a topic for another day. If you want to know more about this story in Quinn's life and the cataclysmic ramifications that came from his scholarship, I strongly recommend an essay he wrote for Sunstone titled Background and Fallout of My 1985 Article. You can also read a chapter that was written by the scholar Christina Rossetti on Quinn's study of Mormon fundamentalism. Her chapter is titled Uncovering the End of Polygamy, D. Michael Quinn and the Sacred Work of History, which appeared in a volume that I was very privileged to edit, titled DNA Mormon Perspectives on the Legacy of Historian D. Michael Quinn. And then perhaps a most important source, if you want to dig into this more, is Quinn's own memoir, titled A Chosen Path, and published by Signature Books. Now, I promised I would give you at least a few more book recommendations if you want to dig more into the end of polygamy and the origins of fundamentalism. So let me just touch on a few. One is B. Carmen Hardy's Solemn Covenant, the Mormon Polygamous Passage, a phenomenal book by University of Illinois Press that is really the magisterial look at how polygamy came to an end and how fundamentalism rose between 1890 and about 1910. I also strongly recommend Kathleen Flake's book, The Politics of American Religious Identity, The Seeding of Senator Reed Smoot, Mormon Apostle, which focused specifically on the 1904 Second Manifesto and how Mormons continue to struggle with what to do with their foundational teaching. And a couple of quick recommendations if you want a history of Mormon fundamentalism. I might do a video on the historiography of that topic at some point in the future, but very briefly, I recommend Brian Hales' book, Mormon Polygamy and Mormon Fundamentalism, Generations After the Manifesto, as well as Craig Foster and Marianne Watson's American Polygamy, The History of Fundamentalist Mormons, which provide great overviews of the different traditions that find their roots back in this tumultuous period. I hope this made sense. I hope this added to your to-read pile. There is never a bad time to go back and read D. Michael Quinn's magisterial scholarship, and I hope this John Taylor Revelation episode allows more people to be introduced to his great work. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and share it if you found it useful so others can find out about this great scholarship that I'm trying to highlight, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. I truly believe history is an important part of today's discussions, and this channel hopes to add to that discourse.